Hey everyone, welcome back to the SwiftUI series. Today we're going beyond basic animations into real-world SwiftUI animations that enhance user experience. From simple fade effects to complex view transitions, SwiftUI gives us a powerful and intuitive way to bring UI to life, all with minimal code. In this tutorial, we'll cover how to use withAnimation, easing functions, and spring effects, how to create smooth view transitions and master view transition animations. You can see I have a really quick opacity view between these two on the simulator here, and I'll even show you how to use gestures and chaining for dynamic interactions. So we'll build this little kind of square that we can grab onto, and when we let go, it kind of comes back and jiggles into place. By the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to build stunning fluid animations in SwiftUI. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Alrighty, let's go ahead and open up Xcode and we'll create a new project. If you want to add any of these to your existing ones, feel free to do so. I'll also be putting what we create here today on my GitHub pages, so if you want to reference any of the code, feel free to do so. The link is in the description below. Alright, I'm going to call this one animation examples. We're going to make sure we're on SwiftUI, language Swift, and we don't need testing or storage to be set up. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's make sure we have our preview open. That's because we're going to be doing a lot of visual things today. If yours isn't open, make sure that you go to our kind of assistant editor panel over here and you enable the canvas. With it off, we can't see our beautiful, beautiful preview. You can also go to the top and go to editor and make sure the canvas is selected and double, triple check that you have the preview in the bottom. So let's go ahead and explore our first animation. We're going to be using a state variable in order to track whether our box is expanded, and we can use that to expand and compress, I guess, at that point. So let's go ahead and create a state private variable under our content view. So we'll do @state private var, and we'll call this one isExpanded. You can call it whatever you like for any of your animations. And let's have this equals false just to start off. We can go ahead and get rid of all the information within our VStack, but we can keep that VStack for now because this is where we're going to be putting our rectangle. To create a rectangle, we're going to do capital R, type out rectangle, and we'll use the empty brackets. You can see now we have this kind of black rectangle occupying most of our phone screen. Let's go ahead and use a ternary operator to determine what color it will be filled with. So a ternary operator is essentially a very shorthand form of an if-else statement. So if we do isExpanded, so that's that Boolean value we've created above, we do the question mark, space, and we'll give our first kind of option here. So we'll say color is blue, and then we kind of use this colon for an else statement. So we'll then say color dot green. So when it's expanded, it's going to be blue. When it's not expanded, it's going to be green. Although it's taking up most of our screen, it's actually currently not expanded. Let's go ahead and add a frame. And we're also going to be using a ternary operator here. These are really great for handling animations in those different states. So we'll provide it with a width. And we'll go ahead and say this is 100. And then we'll add a height value as well. And this height value is going to be determined on whether it's expanded or not. So when it is expanded, say isExpanded, add a question mark again, we'll say that's 200, and we'll use the colon again for else. So in the case of it's not being expanded, it's actually going to be 100. So we'll see that when we add the animation, it's actually going to grow, and then it's also going to compress. So we're essentially animating the height change later on. Fan of the channel, you know I love a good corner radius. Let's go ahead and add one here. And now we're going to add an animation. And we simply do this by adding dot animation. We're then going to fill those arguments or those parameters with what that animation is going to look like, as well as handling the value that it's based off of. So let's actually just set this to be dot default. This is going to be the default animation that's kind of just built in. And we're going to do comma and add a value. And this is where we're going to reference our isExpanded. So this is going to be our implicit animation. All right, cool. We don't currently have a way to handle that state change and make that Boolean go from true to false. You can handle this any way you want. For our tutorial purposes today, I'm just going to do it as a button. We'll just call this one toggle. You could even use a switch if you really wanted to, because we're going between two states, true and false. It's up to you. So within this button, we're going to add a brace and say withAnimation with a capital A. We're not going to use any of these autofills. We're going to add a brace instead. And we're going to say isExpanded dot toggle. Let's go ahead and add a button style down here. So we'll do dot button style, and we'll say bordered prominent. That's the kind of go-to for me. Oh, looks like my preview froze. Hopefully we'll see our button in just a moment here. Okay, there we go. My preview was kind of freaking out. If that happens, turn the canvas on or off, or just restart Xcode. That worked in my case. It happens. Turn it off and on, the age-old trick. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and press our toggle button, and you can see that the color changes and it kind of expands smoothly. We can also press the toggle button again, and it kind of has that smooth transition between the two states. So we can also try different animation styles. So if we go to our animation here, for me it's on line 22, where we have the dot default, we can change this for different animations. If you want to know what animations you can use, documentation is great. We can also use the dot notation in order to kind of see what's available to us. So we have a bunch. We have bouncy. This even has a description, a spring animation with a predefined duration and higher amount of bounce. We're going to be using something like that later on, as I showed you in the preview. And you can kind of see we have a lot of these options. And you'll see a lot of them kind of pop up again. In the case of easeInOut, there's an option where we can actually add a duration. So how long it's going to take. So this will allow us to have smooth acceleration and de-acceleration. So let's set this to be 1.0. Just as a note, this has to be a double. We're kind of dealing with seconds here. Let's go ahead and toggle it again. And you can see that it actually took quite a long time, and the toggle button actually is moving before the rectangle or square has decompressed. So you might want to adjust the time or add a little bit of padding between these two elements just to make sure it's a little bit more polished. If we set this to 2 seconds, you'll see that it takes a much longer time. Let's go ahead and add that padding now so that there's a little bit more space. And we'll set this to be dot bottom and maybe like 20 or something, so there's a decent amount of space, maybe like 50. I don't know. Okay, so if we change this to be 0.2, this should be very quick. Kind of grows and shrinks. So you can augment these animations as much as you want. Let's go ahead and try a couple other before we move on. Let's do linear. We can also add a duration. We can see here with this one. So this is going to be a constant speed animation. Let's set this to be 0.5, so half a second. It looks pretty similar to our default, but each of these has its own kind of quirks and works in its own little way. Let's do spring. For this one, we can add a response. So let's go ahead and set this to be 0.5. Also within these arguments, we can add a comma and add a damping fraction. And let's set this to be 0.8. This is going to create more of a bouncy effect. You can kind of see when it does kind of expand or compress, it kind of has that little jiggle. You might have to slow this one down a little bit more to kind of see those in action. But you can play with these different animations and find something that works for you. All right, let's take this further by adding transitions between views. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Swift file here. So I'm going to go to the right side, new file from template, and we're going to make a new SwiftUI view. Let's call this one transition view. We're also going to use another state variable at the top here, and we're going to use this to control the state of showing the user a box or not. So we'll do state private var, and we'll call this one show box. We'll go ahead and equal this to be false at the very start. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get rid of this placeholder text, and we'll create a vstack here. And we're going to then actually create an if statement in order to handle that Boolean value. So we'll say if showbox. We'll go ahead and add our brace, and we're going to add another rectangle. If you want to play with different shapes like circles or things like that, or have this be an image, whatever you need it to be, this is where you'd kind of add that object and then augment it. So let's go ahead and fill it with a color. Let's go ahead and do orange this time. We're going to go ahead and add a frame. Now something you'll notice is because we're using that if statement and it's currently set to false, nothing's going to be showing on the view for now. Let's go ahead and add a width. Let's do 100, maybe 200, and height. Let's also have it to be 200. And add a corner radius, of course. And here's where we're going to be adding a transition. So for that, we're going to be doing dot transition. And from here, we have our arguments, and we're going to be using more dot notation in order to kind of figure out what we can do and experiment with what we can do. So let's go ahead and see what we have. We have identity, opacity, scale, slide, move, right, push. Let's go ahead and try the slide. You can even see there's multiple options here. I'm just going to select the default dot slide, or you can type it out. This is going to be a smooth slide transition. After this, we can also add an animation. So for this one, we can have it be default again. Let's do .easeOut. I'm going to choose the one with duration. Now we can set this to be 0.5. And for our value, so we're going to put a comma after that easeOut. Say value show box. Okay, cool. We're going to go ahead and hop out of this if statement here, and we're going to create our button. Again, handle this how you'd like. If this is something that the user toggles, interact with, you determine based off condition, right? Up to you. We'll then say with animation, just like we did before, we're going to do showbox.toggle, and that's going to toggle between those two states. So now we have some text here. You know what? Let's add a little bit of button style again, just so it kind of stands out. My border prominent, a lot of tint. Let's make it. Sure, purple, why not? Okay, let's go ahead and toggle our box. We can see that it kind of slides in, and just with like the other object we had on the other screen, it does kind of push it down. And now when we toggle the box again, it's going to kind of swipe it. This one, it could definitely use some improvements, right? It's like, where does this box come from? And it kind of goes over here and hangs out before it disappears. Let's go ahead and edit our transition. Instead of sliding it in, let's go ahead and play around with opacity. So now when we toggle the box, kind of see that it appears and then it disappears very smoothly. So that handles the fading in and out. Let's do dot scale. So this is going to be for zooming in and out. That looks pretty cool. We can kind of see it expand and shrink. And we can even experiment with move. Again, if you want to figure out what any of these are, the dot notation or the documentation is a really great friend. So with the dot move, we can also include an edge. So this is where we can do things like top, bottom, trailing, or leading. So let's do leading, and we'll see how it moves from the left. So dot move, edge, dot trailing. If you're fast enough before it disappears, you can actually apparently press the toggle a couple times. But you can see it kind of pops out and then pops on in. Something that's really cool is we can actually have combinations within our transitions. So if we do dot slide and afterwards we do dot combined, you can see how we've combined with, we can add another transition. So if we want to do dot opacity, this will slide and fade. So now when we toggle the box, it kind of slides and fades. You can get really in-depth with these animations and transitions to make the smoothest, most beautiful looking app you've ever seen. One of the most powerful ways to use animations in SwiftUI is with view transition animations when navigating between two views. Instead of just pushing and popping views, we can apply custom animations to make transitions feel smoother and more polished. Let's build an example where tapping a button transitions smoothly between two SwiftUI views. So we're going to create a couple SwiftUI views in our project here. I'm going to create a new file from template, the SwiftUI view. Let's call this one home view. And before we get ahead of ourselves, we'll make another one here, another file from template. And we'll just call this one detail view. It'll be our second view. If you want to call it second view or something, go for it. For me, I'm going to go ahead and call it detail view. Okay. Clicking back on our home view here. So in our home view, let's go ahead and get rid of this text. It's going to cause errors for a moment, but that's okay. We're then going to create a state private variable at the top, just as we did before, to handle the navigation. Let's call this one show detail. We'll have it equal false. Even when we kind of create sheets and things like that, we'll typically do it this way because it allows us to kind of control navigation, controls what the user's kind of seeing in front of them. Now in our variable body sum view, we're going to create a navigation view. Add a brace, hit return, and we'll also be creating a vstack, as this is where our kind of content's going to go. I'm just going to create some very basic content just so we can kind of see what's happening. I'm just going to say welcome to our app. If you have more things on the screen, obviously gonna kind of transition everything over. We're just gonna be putting this with like a font of large title, right? Maybe we can bold it as well. After this text, we're gonna go ahead and create a button here, and this is going to allow us to go to detail view. We can then add our brace, and we're going to add our with animation once again. But before we add the brace, we're going to add a bracket, and this is where we can kind of choose what animation we're going to have. So in this case, I'm going to do, let's do easeInOut with a duration. Set this to be 0.5. Once we're happy with the animation, I'm going to add the brace, and just with before, we're going to do show detail dot toggle, or whatever you've decided to call this Boolean value that we created above. Outside of the button here, so we need to go down 2 braces, or we can just double click at the outside of this button. We're going to then handle our navigation to the detail view with an animated transition. So we're going to say if show detail, so when that value is true, we can add a brace here, say detail view. Oh, I think I spelled it wrong. I was like, why is it not showing up in the autofill there? Okay, detail view, and then we're gonna add our brackets. I'll say show detail, colon, and we're gonna reference a binding of show detail. On the next line, we'll add a dot transition. And from here, we can really choose what we want. In this case, let's do a dot move, and we'll do the edge again. And let's try trailing. You can always play around with these transitions. If you want to make it opacity, go ahead and do it to your heart's content. Now we are going to be getting an error. That's because when we hop over to our detail view, and let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go to our detail view. We are going to be needing to create a binding, right? We kind of referenced it before it was created. I do that all the time, get ahead of myself. So in our structure, let's create that at binding variable. So binding var show detail. We need to declare that it is a Boolean value, true or false. So this is going to allow controlling the transition back as well. So we are going to get an error in our preview. You can, do the quick fix as I showed before. I'm just going to delete it. We'll show you the transition to and from in the other view. I'm being lazy today. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of the default text here. We'll go ahead and add a VStack. Add some text. We'll just declare that we are now in the detail view. Going to add some font, make it large title, I guess title in this case, and we'll also bold it. And let's go ahead and create a button for our users to go back. Say go back. Just as we did before with animation, add our arguments here. You can even go back and copy and paste. So let's have this be 0.5, and we'll do the show detail to now equals false. We want to have a transition going back at the end of the VStack here. Let's go down here. We'll add a dot transition. We can also have this be move edge leading. Again, play around with this, but this is going to allow us to animate back when dismissed. So let's hop back over to our home view here. And let's click on the go to detail view. You can kind of see that it pops up and slides on in. It might look a little bit better if we handle our transitions a little bit different. So the current issue now becomes, well, what if we want to kind of transition between those pages, right? This is great for bringing another view in. Maybe we have some information about the user or like pop up, but this isn't really great for navigating to and from screens. How can we fix this? Well, the best solution to this is to actually use match geometry. However, there is another solution called navigation destination. I find that the match geometry creates the best seamless transition. So we're going to make some changes to our home view as well as our detail view in order to use shared animations. So the first thing we actually need to do is under our navigation view, we're actually going to change this to be a navigation stack. This is something that's more traditional when we are using screens that we're kind of going to and from. If you do use a navigation stack, typically it's also going to add like a default back button in the top corner. And in order to handle match geometry, we're going to create a at namespace. This is going to be a private var, and we're going to call this one animation. Then under our text, what we're going to do is now add a matched geometry effect. I'm going to use the autofill feature here to just make my life easier. And here we're going to add a ID. So in this case, it's going to be title. We can reference this ID later on for any other titles. So if you have anything like images on both screens, you can provide it with the exact same ID. And we're going to say in animation. So that's that namespace that we created above. Alrighty, we're also going to be recreating our button. So instead, we're going to say button, and we're going to have the action, we'll add a brace, we'll hit return, and we're going to say with animation. And let's have this one be a spring. And for the spring, you can add parameters, so I'm just going to leave the argument blank. We'll then add a brace, and we'll say show detail view, or sorry, just show detail equals true. Afterwards, let's go down to the end of the button here. We can add some text here, and we'll have this basically style the button. So go to detail view. We can add a background. Maybe we'll have it be purple. In the foreground style, it can be white. And a corner radius, obviously. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is right under our VStack, we're actually going to create an if statement. So we're going to say if, we're going to use the exclamation point for opposite, show detail, and then we're going to add a brace, and we're going to wrap this up all the way down to the end of our kind of button styling here. So I'm going to add another brace, and where we have this if statement, I'm then going to change it into an else statement. Instead of this show detail, we're actually going to delete that, and we're just going to have our detail view and our transition. We can leave it at opacity, but we're also going to pass through the animation, and we're going to just say animation : animation. Now we will get an error because there's an extra argument for animation and call. Detail view doesn't know what to do with that yet. So let's hop on over to our detail view, and under the binding, we're going to create a variable. So just a bar, and we're going to call it animation, and it's going to go to the namespace dot ID, capital ID. Now if we go to our detail view text, let's add that matched geometry effect. And this is where we can use that ID we created before of title. It is case sensitive. And in the in, we're going to have animation. We're also going to be changing our button. If you actually want to save time and just go back to our home view here, and we can actually just copy and paste our button. And I don't know why that button wasn't updating before. That was pretty weird. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this over. So instead of our button to go back, let's paste this. Let's change this text to be go back. And we'll have to change that show detail to be false. Cool, and we'll want to keep our transition at the bottom. I'm just gonna add a little padding. And now when we go to our home view, you'll see that it kind of transitions those two things between the button. You'll notice sometimes if the text is a little bit large, you'll notice when the welcome to our app kind of appears, it gets a little messed up. We can fix this with our animations or our styling, right? We might even want to make it a multi-line text alignment. But now when we're kind of transitioning between these two views, everything's kind of fading away and then popping back up. So let's go ahead and add an image real quick in here. So if we go to our object library, our symbols, I don't know, let's just grab a random one. Is there one of a dog? Yes, let's do a dog. And you can kind of see that that dog does kind of fade out. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Right, so everything kind of fades with that transition of the opacity fading in and out. So why does this work? Well, the match geometry ensures that text smoothly animates between the views. You could handle this, with everything. And we also have the transition dot opacity, and this is going to fade the screens. Instead of an instant switch, you can do whatever transition you want here. And the with animation spring creates a natural and responsive animation. So the match geometry effect is best for smooth and polished animations. For example, elements smoothly moving between those two views. You can play around with all the transitions and animations and make it your own. Okay, last and certainly not least, let's go ahead and talk about those gestures. So let's go ahead and see how we can use animations when we use drag. So let's create a new file from template, and we're going to create a SwiftUI view. Let's call this one drag animation view. If you haven't really played around with kind of gestures and like on press and things like that, I do have a video dedicated just to that, but this will kind of give you the basics. So we're going to create a state private variable, and we're going to call this one drag offset. And we're going to set this to be CG size equals .0. This is basically going to allow our object that we're creating to have almost like a home anchor point. We're going to get rid of our text, and we're going to create a rounded rectangle. And within these, we can add a corner radius, and let's set this to be 25. Of course, I'm going to put a corner radius. We can also change the fill. Let's go ahead and have this be color.purple. And we can also add a frame because currently it is absolutely huge. So let's add a width. Let's do 150, as well as a height, also 150. We're going to be creating our square here. And then we're going to do dot offset, and we're going to reference our drag offset that we created above. And now we're going to create a dot gesture. Here we're going to add a bracket, and we're going to reference drag gesture. Okay, now we're going to add some properties. So the first one is onChanged. We're not going to be using the autofill here because we're going to do a brace. And we're going to say value in drag offset equals value dot translation. On the next line, so outside of that brace, we're going to do dot on ended. Oh, capital E on that one. Although we're not going to use the autofill because once again, we're going to be adding a brace. We're going to say underscore in with animation. Let's do dot spring. I'll actually show you how to make it jiggle like the one in the preview. And like when you touch jelly, that's what it kind of looked like. Okay, so we're gonna, after that, we're gonna add another brace. We're gonna open it on up, and we're gonna have the drag offset equals .0. Okay, so we do have an error here. Oh, so for the onChange, the C does need to be capitalized. Oh, and it looks like I forgot to close off my bracket on the gesture. So the gesture bracket should go all the way until after the double brace of the on ended. So I'll just highlight it here just in case you made the same mistake I did. The gesture kind of holds all of this. So now we should be able to click and drag and move this kind of around. You can see we move it to the corner, and when we let it go back, it kind of comes back into the middle, and it does have a spring effect, although it might be a little bit hard to see. So if we want to make this spring even crazier, we can go ahead and add a few more properties to it. Some that you can see are maybe bouncy, smooth. So I'm going to do the bouncy, and there's actually a variant where we can add duration as well as extra bounce, or why not both in this case. So I'm going to use the autofill feature here, but essentially we're adding another bracket saying dot bouncy, and we're adding a duration. Let's set this to be 1.0, and the extra bounce, let's set this to be 2.0. So now if we swing it, it kind of goes and bounces. Now, the only thing with this one is it might last way too long. Let's edit this extra bounce to be 1.0 and this duration now to be 0.5. And now let's see our spring and bounce in action. Okay, it's still going a little hot. It's still going a little crazy. Set this extra bounce to be 0.5. Okay, that's a little bit more tame. So now when we kind of drag, we have the extra bounce, and it kind of jiggles before it falls back into place. So you can see there is so much you can do with these animations, right? Even with just the spring, it works, and it kind of has a little bit, but if we want to add more pep in our step and more of an animation, you can play around with these numbers. You can play around with all of these different things in order to make your app as beautiful and as animated as possible. So some final takeaways. Now that you've mastered SwiftUI animations, here's how I'd use them in a real world app. Social media apps, those smooth page transitions that I was showing you earlier. The health apps, you can use this with animated workout progress. E-commerce apps, dynamic cart and checkout animations. Something that would be cool is maybe when you add an item to the cart, maybe the cart kind of grows in size and then shrinks back to normal after a second or two. Maybe even, the color changes to green so the users can see, oh, I've added an item to my cart. There's that visual feedback. So what's next? Well, start adding these animations to your SwiftUI apps today. This is something that makes them so polished and will really enhance that user experience. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, dream big, code bigger, and we'll see you in the next one.